been found. Won't you stay with us for Shabbos, Minyan Man? I stepped off the bus in Mobile, Alabama. The sun was slowly setting on the bay. It was 6 o'clock on a summer Friday afternoon. Shabbos was an hour away. I walked around the town, wondering what to do. Shabbos is no time to be feeling blue. And then I saw a man who looked the same way too. I was quite relieved to find the fellow Jew. I asked the man I saw how many Jews in this town. He said to me there used to be a million around, but one of us passed away and we've been feeling down. Yet now it seems as though another Jew has been found. Won't you stay with us for Shabbos, Minyan Man? We walked down Winston Avenue, a block then two more. We went into a shop that read closed on the door. There was a minion in the back of a hardware store. 9 men waiting for one more.
Good evening! How's everybody doing? Let me turn this off. Okay. Always making little improvements. How's everybody doing? I'm excited to be with you. Let us light up the darkness. And see who's in the house with us. Yehudit Sobel says shalom from Florence, South Carolina. James Roth is in the house from Indianapolis. Elizabeth Hunt Lucarini from Tucson. Stephen Giguere from Dover, New Hampshire. Melissa Itel-Jurin from Great Neck, New York. Nancy Jones from St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome. Bill Aldridge says hello from Berkeley. And my freshly minted new student housing. Mazel tov, Bill. May you enjoy your home in great health and happiness. Christo Cheney says, shalom from Lubbock, Texas. I look forward to these broadcasts every day. Ann Marathon from Charleston, South Carolina. Lana Kopiron says hello from Michigan. Alan Bassnett, hello, beautiful Beaufort, South Carolina, in the house. Lucy Ram Johnson says shalom from Minnesota. John Shore is with us from Sedona, Arizona. Jason Van Borsum, the Holy Reverend Jason Van Borsum from Texas is with us. And he says, I love you, Achi, I love you, my brother. Lana Kopiron says, good, Baruch Hashem. Carol Adriana says shalom. Robert Egby says shalom from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, Robert. It's fantastic to have you with us. Karen Dinini Spaffard says hello from upstate New York. Doc Wolf says good Shabbos from London. And Jacob Ryan Rigsby says howdy, brother. Lynn Job and Neil Green are in the house on the YouTube side. All right, how are we doing? Are you guys in the mood for some fabulous Talmud? It's going to be a really good one. I'm really enjoying this page. I was enjoying getting ready to teach today, and I think you're going to enjoy learning it. We are holding on page 132. That's Kuf Lamed Beis of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 19, which is all about the laws of circumcision as they interact with Shabbos. And we are still discussing Mishnah number 1. Before we get into that, let me just mention that yesterday I was talking about Rabbi Eliezer, and as you'll recall, Rabbi Eliezer differs from the other rabbis with respect to the facilitators of bris, the facilitators of the circumcision, meaning everybody agrees that if a baby boy, his 8th day of life, falls on Shabbos, that we perform his circumcision on Shabbos. It overrides Shabbos. Normally, we wouldn't do an elective medical procedure on Shabbos. But the Torah says on the 8th day, and so we do it on the 8th day. Rabbi Eliezer says, and anything that you need to do the circumcision, you do. And the other sages say, no, if it could have been done on Friday and you didn't do it on Friday, we're going to have to postpone the circumcision. So, for example, in a town without an Erev, you can't carry the knife. On Shabbos, you'd have to bring it over on Friday before. Rabbi Eliezer would permit that. And we had a whole bunch of Eliezer's opinions on this. And the way that he derives his opinion. Yesterday, we spent the whole day talking about Rabbi Eliezer's minority overruled opinion. So even though it's not the law, we spent a lot of care understanding why Eliezer holds the way that he holds. I mentioned that he was a Shamuti, meaning that he was a follower of Shammai, of Beis Shammai, right? So he was the Hebrew world, the religious Jewish world was sort of split into two camps in the late Second Temple period, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And, they mostly agreed on everything, but there were a few little areas. I mean, it wasn't such a small number, but there were nuances of the law that they disagreed about, but they disagreed pretty fervently, pretty passionately. Ultimately, we received an actual voice from heaven that said that the law is going to follow Beis Hillel. Now, in passing, I said yesterday that the followers of Shammai were just totally committed to truth above everything, and that the followers of Hillel, they had more of a compassionate approach. And somebody said to me afterward, it's not that Hillel, at Beis Hillel, the followers of Hillel, the house of Hillel, as it were, was not committed to the truth. It's not true at all. Both sides were 100% committed to the truth in Torah as it had developed and been taught to them and sort of been analyzed in their house, as it were, in their, not sect, but just, this basic division that had formed on certain laws. Most laws everybody agreed on, but just on certain laws. Now, it's important to understand, Beis Hillel were just as committed to the truth as Beis Shammai. We know that people who are passionate and smart and putting all their heart into the analysis can come out in a different place, and it doesn't mean that they were somehow doing something wrong or misappropriating the Torah for their own reason. They just came out in a different place. Why did the law end up following Beis Hillel in most of these matters over the opinions of Beis Shammai? We're actually going to talk about this. It's a very famous story. It's perhaps the most famous teaching of the Talmud, and that's going to be in our next tractate, Eruvin, on page 13. But I'll just mention here that, the spoiler, give away the ending of that story. Ultimately, the law followed Beis Hillel because when Beis Hillel would dispute Beis Shammai, they would state the opinions of their opponents before their own. And as a matter of argumentation and advocacy, we learn so much from that, right? When you're trying to convince somebody to do things your way, you should start by understanding their opinion and stating it in such a way that they would say, yes, that's my opinion. Now you've set the table for a real dialogue. And we learned that from Beis Hillel. So because they had a little bit more of this, this give and take and interest in the other side, perhaps than Beis Shammai did, ultimately heaven decreed that the law would follow Beis Hillel. So that was a little bit of that difference that I was mentioning between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. All right, on today's page, we've been talking about, as I mentioned yesterday with Eliezer, the facilitators of the mitzvah of circumcision, right? Bringing the knife or bringing the pillow that the baby is going to be on in a place where there's no Erev, you can't carry. Now we're going to talk about specifically, how do we know that circumcision overrides Shabbos? How do we know that? How did the sages derive that if the 8th day of a Jewish boy's life falls on Shabbos, that we perform that circumcision on Shabbos? Maybe we should wait. I mean, the fact is, as we're going to see, If for some reason the circumcision is delayed, right? If the baby's a little bit sick, a little bit jaundiced, a little bit red, if there's any physical thing going on with the baby that would make it a little bit dangerous to perform, even a little bit dangerous to perform that operation on the 8th day, we postpone it. And once we postpone it, we need to do it on the first day possible when the baby is healthy and is ready for the circumcision. We don't delay it at all unless the first day that its health is restored falls on Shabbos. Then we won't override Shabbos. We only override Shabbos to perform the circumcision on its day, the 8th day. But that is not written in the Torah. Nowhere does it say in the written Torah, and if the baby's 8th day of life falls on Shabbos, you perform the circumcision anyway. So how do we know that that is the law? The sages are going to talk, and that's what this whole page, today's daf, is all about. So a bunch of people are going to suggest how we know that the circumcision on the 8th day overrides the restrictions of Shabbos. Ula is going to be first. Ula says, we know it because it's a tradition that has been handed down to us since Moses at Sinai. In other words, this is a halacha lemoshe mi Sinai. It is a law that was given to Moses from Sinai. And it's not like there's so many of them, but there are certain core laws that are in the oral tradition that actually began right at the beginning. One of them is tefillin. What does tefillin look like? You know, the black box that I wear on my arm in the morning and wrap the strap around my arm, the one in front of my forehead. All it says in the written Torah is you shall bind these words as a sign upon your hand, and it should be a symbol before your eyes. That's what it says in the Torah. You wouldn't know what tefillin are from that passage. And what tefillin are was taught by God to Moses at Sinai. There are many laws. The Talmud is, so many volumes full of them. There are many laws that our sages figured out from the Torah using exegetical principles, using these 13 rules of Rabbi Yishmael, that, like the Gezerah Shava that we've been talking about, a verbal analogy, that there's a common word in two different laws that makes a linkage between those laws. And we also have the Kal V'chomer, which is, Rabbi Steinsaltz in the Koren Talmud translates as an a fortiori sequence, meaning if we have a leniency within a very strict law, then when we go to a more lenient law that is the same principle, that leniency will certainly extend. Or if we have a stringency within a lenient law, then even in a more lenient law, it's for sure, within a more stringent law, for sure that stringency is going to exist. And these are principles that the sages use to learn out certain laws from what's written there. So Ula is going to start by saying, okay, the only way we know that circumcision overrides Shabbos when it's on the 8th day is because we received that tradition. We don't know it any other way. We can't derive it from the Torah. Elazar ben Azariah is going to object to Ula. He's going to say, no, you're wrong. Here's why you're wrong. We have a Kal V'chomer, okay, so this a fortiori sequence for saving a life, which is based on the laws of circumcision, right? So we have this principle that the sages have learned out. How do we know that saving a life overrides the restrictions of Shabbos? Now, we've said that, you've heard me say that at least 100 times during our journey through Shabbos. How do we know that? How do we know that saving a life overrides Shabbos? Our sages actually learned that from the law of circumcision, that it overrides Shabbos. If we override Shabbos to perform a mitzvah that affects one limb of the body, how much more will we override Shabbos to do a mitzvah that saves all the limbs of the body so that the person can keep performing other mitzvahs, can be alive in this world and live to perform more mitzvahs, right? That's how we know that saving a life overrides Shabbos. We derive it from the law of circumcision. And we have a tradition that we do not make a Kal V'chomer. We do not make this kind of lenient to stringent or stringent to lenient teaching based on a halacha lemoshe Sinai, right? We don't base that if in the lenient case we do like this, then in the more stringent case, for sure we're going to do like that. We don't base that kind of an exegesis on a halacha that was given to Moses at Sinai. We only base it on teachings that are in the Torah. So if we're learning out that we save a life based on the fact on Shabbos, based on the fact that circumcision overrides Shabbos, it must be because circumcision overriding Shabbos can be derived directly from the written Torah, and we don't need to rely on a tradition passed down from teacher to student, going all the way back to Moses at Sinai. Therefore, where can we derive it in the Torah that circumcision overrides Shabbos? It must be in there. Rabbi Elazar says it's a gezerah shava, it's a verbal analogy, meaning that there's a word, a superfluous word that's in two places, and that links those two laws. Rabbi Elazar is going to say that word is ois. Ois means sign. It's a sign. And the word sign, it shall be a sign for you, is included in both the laws of circumcision. The circumcision will be a sign for you. It will symbolically remind you of your relationship to God. And the word ois, sign, is included in the laws of Shabbos. Therefore, since that word is in both places, that's how we learn that circumcision overrides Shabbos. And then the Gemara objects, wait a minute, that doesn't work. The word ois is also included in the laws of tefillin. It shall be a sign in front of your head, right? That's how we know what tefillin is. We will bind these words upon your hand. There shall be a sign, a symbol upon your hand. There shall be a sign before your eyes. So, ois is already there with tefillin. Now, we don't even wrap tefillin on Shabbos. We certainly don't tie our tefillin, right? Tying the knots, the permanent knots in the leather straps of tefillin, that is a labor that's prohibited on Shabbos, and we don't override Shabbos to tie tefillin so that tefillin will be ready, let's say, for the next day, because that does not override Shabbos. Even though tefillin is such an important mitzvah, we don't even put them on Shabbos, and we certainly don't make permanent knots in them. So we can't learn out that just because the word ois is in Shabbos and in circumcision, therefore circumcision overrides Shabbos, because ois is in both Shabbos and tefillin does not override Shabbos. Maybe there's another word. The Gemara says bris, the covenant, right? The word covenant is written both in the laws of the circumcision. It is a symbol of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And the word covenant is included in the laws of Shabbos. Shabbos itself is a sign of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. So because covenant is in both places, that is why circumcision overrides Shabbos. But the Gemara objects as soon as it has raised this point. It must not be so that this is the reason why circumcision overrides Shabbos, because the word covenant is also included in the law of the adult uncircumcised male. If for some reason a Jewish male has reached adulthood and he's not circumcised, he's separated. He's separated from the Jewish people. He's not allowed to participate in the Passover offering. He can't eat from the Passover lamb or the Passover goat at Passover until he gets circumcised. And in explaining that law, the word covenant is mentioned. It's so important, right? Once an adult male has that opportunity. This happened all the time. There were Russian Jews, just like there were Jews in Egypt, as we learned over the last couple days. They couldn't get circumcised. They weren't circumcising when they were slaves in Egypt. They weren't circumcising when they were living under the oppression of the Soviet Union. But once they became free, now they can circumcise. They should do it immediately so that they are, reconnected with the Jewish heritage. Immediately, but not on Shabbos. Circumcising the adult male does not override Shabbos. The word covenant is in both places. It doesn't justify the circumcision of the adult male overriding Shabbos, so it doesn't work as the proof that the baby's circumcision overrides Shabbos. So then the Gemara says, okay, it's not ois, it's not a sign, it's not bris, it's not the covenant. It must be doiros. That word means generations, right? Doiros is generations. The word generations, it will carry on through your generations. That is written both in the laws of circumcision and in the laws of Shabbos. And that word creates the Gezerah Shava and teaches us that this is why the baby circumcision overrides Shabbos. But the word doiros, generations, is also written in the law of tzitzis, of the ritual fringes. They are going to be something that you're going to pass down through your generations. It's right in the Shema. And the ritual fringes, we do not tie them. We wear them on Shabbos, but we do not tie them on Shabbos. If they get untied, we don't tie that. We don't retie them. And we certainly don't attach fringes on Shabbos to a new garment. The law of tzitzis does not override Shabbos. The word doros, generations, is included both in the laws of Shabbos and in the laws of tzitzis, the ritual fringes. So that can't be the reason that circumcision overrides Shabbos. So we're back where we started. How do we know that the law of circumcision overrides the restrictions of Shabbos? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says the reason that circumcision overrides Shabbos is because only these two passages, the laws of Shabbos and the laws of circumcision, both include all three words, doiros, ois, and bris. Generations, a sign, a symbol, and the covenant. All three words are common to both circumcision and Shabbos. The other mitzvahs that we've mentioned, tefillin and tzitzis and circumcising the adult male, do not include all three words. Now that's pretty convincing. But the discussion doesn't stop there. In fact, no one says, okay, you nailed it, Rav Nachman. That must be the reason. In fact, it just goes on to try another approach. Why doesn't this prove it? Perhaps because finding three words common in both places is not one of the established principles of deriving a law from the written law where it's not explicitly given. And so the conversation goes on. So Rabbi Yochanan says, look, the reason that circumcision overrides Shabbos is because it says you shall do it on the eighth day. On the eighth day is on the eighth day. You have to do it on the eighth day. So Reish Lakish says, well, wait a minute. We have the law of the Zav. So this is a man who's had a certain kind of fluid discharge, who contracts tuma, ritual impurity because of it. Or the one who healed from tzara'as, usually translated as leprosy erroneously. Tzara'as was an outbreak on the skin that doesn't exist anymore. It was never a physical disease. It was a physical manifestation of a spiritual malady that only existed while the temple was standing. If a person had tzara'as and then he healed from it, so then he immerses, he's ready, and he has to bring an offering, and so does the Zav. They have to bring an offering on the eighth day, a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice. They have to bring it on the eighth day, same phrase, on the eighth day. But does this offering of the Zav or the offering of the one who healed from tzara'as override the restrictions of Shabbos? No, it does not. There are offerings that override Shabbos. There's the daily communal offering in the morning and the afternoon, and those are offered on Shabbos. Even though we would normally not slaughter and we would not burn, those are brought on Shabbos, but they are communal offerings brought by the priest on the altar when the temple is standing. No other offerings, individual offerings, override Shabbos. So now Reish Lakish has shown that the phrase on the eighth day is not enough to justify that the circumcision overrides the restrictions of Shabbos. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, well, I thought that on the eighth day would override Shabbos and that was good enough, but then I thought about it some more, And I thought, well, maybe on the eighth day simply means on the eighth day, unless the eighth day falls on Shabbos. Maybe we've got this wrong. How do we know that circumcision overrides Shabbos? How do we know that? So why don't we actually read these laws that we have been talking about? It's basically two places. The short version is in Leviticus after the Torah has been given to the Jewish people. This is Leviticus chapter 12, verse 3. On the eighth day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. That's it. Simple, straight out. This chapter begins. It's talking about a woman conceives and gives birth to a male. And on the eighth day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Simple. Where did circumcision originally get laid out in the Torah? It was before the Torah was given to the Jewish people. It was a commandment given to Abraham. But it was very clear that this is a commandment given to you and your descendants. So this is Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. And this is the lengthier explanation of the law from God. When Abram was 99 years old, Hashem appeared to Avram, right? So this is before God changed Avram's name to Avraham. Hashem appeared to Avram and said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk before me and be perfect. I will set my covenant between me and you, and I will increase you most exceedingly. Avram threw himself upon his face, and God spoke with him, saying, As for me, this is my covenant. This is my bris. This is my covenant with you. You shall be a father of a multitude of nations. Your name shall no longer be called Avram, but your name shall be Avraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you most exceedingly fruitful, and make nations of you, and kings shall descend from you. I will ratify my covenant between me and you, and between your offspring after you, throughout their generations, as an everlasting covenant, to be a God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojourns, the whole of the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I shall be a God to them. God said to Abraham, and as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. At the age of 8 days, every male among you shall be circumcised throughout your generations. He that is born in the household or purchased with money from any stranger who is not of your offspring, he that is born in your household or purchased with your money shall surely be circumcised. Thus my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. An uncircumcised male who will not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, that soul shall be cut off from its people. He has invalidated my covenant. So that is how we learn the law of circumcision. And as you see, when you think about the Bible and how huge stories, that span days, months, years, are often told in 2 or 3 sentences, here, that command is made very explicit. The word covenant is mentioned 13 times as Avram has his name changed to Avraham, and as he's told that he and his descendants will be obligated to circumcise on the 8th day. That's the law as it's written in the Torah. So, but did it say that the circumcision overrides Shabbos? No, it's not explicitly said. So ultimately, the sages don't really come up with a convincing final explanation for how it's derived from the Torah. It's not rock solid. And this is why I believe Ula said, who began our discussion, it's a halacha, Moshe Sinai. Moses received it at Sinai. He was told, yeah, this is it. You've been doing it since Abraham. While the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, they lost it. They stopped doing circumcision because of the oppression and the bondage that they were under. But now you're going to renew. This is key to the faith of your fathers. And it has to be done. So it must have been told to Moses that it's going to happen, and it needs to be done, and it has to be done on the 8th day, and therefore it has to be done. It will override Shabbos. And like the fact that it's so intertwined. Like there's no other mitzvah. Shabbos, yes. Like Shabbos is mentioned many more times, right? Shabbos is mentioned so many times in the Torah. But there's no other mitzvah like circumcision, which is so intertwined with the heritage, with the Masorah, the tradition itself, going all the way back to Abraham. And it's just a unique mitzvah in that way. And so it's some combination of, we've always done it. We heard it from Moses at Sinai. It's mentioned 13 times in that passage. And the bottom line is all of the sages accepted. Nobody challenged that when you have a baby boy and its 8th day is on Shabbos and the boy is healthy, we do the circumcision on Shabbos. And now I'm going to take comments and questions, but I'll just add my own thinking. So this is not from some other source. This is just me. Like I sort of, before this class, I said, God, help me, please help me understand why do we do it? Why is it so important? Really, if it must have been given to Moses at Sinai, and that's good enough for me, and our sages said we do it, and that's definitely good enough for me. But can we look into the spiritual dimension of this law and try to understand at a spiritual level what is the message? That bris overrides Shabbos, why? So as we have talked all the way through this tractate, Shabbos, right, the 7th day is the absolute crowning glory of the creation. Right, the crowning of the actual creation is women. Like the human woman was the last thing created. It was the last, creation of God. The penultimate was Adam, and the ultimate was Eve. So she is the greatest thing in the creation. And then God rested. Enough. And Shabbos is beyond the creation. Right, Shabbos is beyond. And that's why when we enter Shabbos and we observe it with all its rules and carefully, and we really commit to Shabbos, then the Shabbos experience becomes something totally different. And we connect with our higher soul, which we get a measure of our higher soul gifted to us for that 25 hours of Shabbos. We're in a higher spiritual existence. So Shabbos is that important. And that old saying, more than the Jews have kept Shabbos, Shabbos has kept the Jews. So Shabbos is just ultimately important. We even learn directly in the Torah that the construction of the tabernacle, the construction of the temple, as it were, the construction of the residence for the presence of God in this world, even that would be halted for Shabbos. So what is it about circumcision that's going to override Shabbos? I think the secret is in the number 8. It's the 8th day, right? The 7th day is the absolute crowning glory of the creation, but it's part of the creation. The number 8 represents beyond, outside, infinity. 8 represents infinity. 8 is because we have this loving relationship with God, that we have access, even when we're in this world, to the world beyond, to the world beyond, to the world to come, to the world of souls, to the world beyond. Made only possible because we love God and God loves us. That relationship enables us to transcend time and space. And the bris, the circumcision, represents that relationship with infinity, right? The relationship, like we don't understand why, like circumcision, like resting on Shabbos makes sense. Like, stop, reconnect, enjoy the glory of the world, enjoy the glory of God. The bris is super rational. We don't understand why he said cut off that part of the body. Why is that command so wrapped up in the relationship between God and his children? We don't understand it. It's from God. It's from beyond this world. 8 suggests infinity. And I think God is teaching us that we don't understand the bris. We're not going to understand the bris, but it connects us somehow to the infinity of God. And I'll just mention, because I looked it up right before class, infinity is represented by a sideways 8, right? It's kind of thought to be a little bit like a Mobius. It's a, endless loop to loop, right? The sideways 8 represents infinity. Why does that symbol represent infinity? It's a mathematical symbol. Since when does it represent infinity? It actually only came into use by mathematicians not that long ago. In terms of Jewish history, it's like yesterday. It started in 1655. It was introduced by John Wallis. Okay, now since then, the sideways 8 represents infinity in mathematics. Where did John Wallis get it? No one knows. It's a mystery. He chose that symbol. He needed a symbol to represent infinity. Why did he choose a sideways 8? No one knows. Perhaps it's tied to the 8th day. Let us see what your comments and questions are. Lena Kopyra, I saw a video online that states there was a scientific study that showed that a baby has extra vitamin K in the baby's blood only on the 8th day and not before or after. That is fascinating. I was not aware of that. I do know that when you're talking about somebody getting a circumcision when they're an adult, or even a teenager, or even, a kid, like beyond being an 8-day-old baby, it's a more serious procedure, not less. It's actually, it's more, capable of having complications. It's more complicated. It requires greater care, more medical, resources potentially. But as we know, for 3,000 years, it works very steadily and guaranteed for babies on their 8th day. Mark Price, sorry, the new Facebook page layout is hard to make sense of. I can't see what I am typing. I'm with you. I don't understand the new Facebook layout. Hopefully they'll get it set so that it's comfortable and we all get used to it. They're always messing with the algorithm. What can I say? I just wanted to say, I love the way you relate the epistemological and ethical elements of the Torah. How do we know? Are we sure? Great to see this level of thinking in a popular Facebook site. Thank you, Mark. Lena Kopyra, yes, so true about the Soviet Union. It was impossible to get circumcised, even for medical reasons. No doctors wanted any part of that. It was frustrating. Thank you for sharing your personal experience, Lana. That's what it sounds like. Caroline Dobson Chavez, does being unclean mean being not pure or not holy, or is that one and the same? So being unclean, is that, first of all, that's not a good word. The word is impure or pure. So in Hebrew, it's tuma or tameh. A person is tameh. He is impure, or he is tahor. He is pure. And it's not related, to cleanliness, and it's not related to somebody did something wrong. There are just certain things that cause us to be impure, like touching the corpse of a human, or even a dead, or the carcass of an animal, touching a creeping thing, certain insects or a snake or a mouse, having an emission, giving birth. A woman is tameh when she gives birth. She hasn't done anything wrong. Quite the contrary. She's done the most glorious thing that the human race can do. She's given birth to a baby. It's just a condition that comes on us. And so when the temple is standing, then there are ways to become tahor again. And you must become tahor before you enter the courtyard of the temple. One cannot enter the temple in a state of impurity. These days, there's almost nothing that we deal with in terms of Tum and Tahara. except the laws of Nida. So the laws between a Jewish husband and wife. When she has her menses, after it finishes, she counts 7 clean days, and then she goes to immerse in the mikveh. When she comes out, she's tahor, and she and her husband are permitted to each other. And some, Jewish men, Orthodox Jewish men, especially in the Hasidic community, will immerse in a mikveh also, but they're not commanded to. It's more of just a tradition. It's not an obligation. But really, these laws, and we spend a lot of time in the Talmud talking about Tumah and Tahara, but really, at the end of the day, if you look at kind of the spiritual component of what's going on with purity and impurity, it causes one to be very mindful of their surroundings and what they touch and what they don't touch. That's what it really does. That's what it causes. I mean, you actually become tameh from touching a Sefer Torah, from touching a Torah. A Torah will make you tameh. So, there's nothing holier than the Torah. Why would it make a person who touches it tameh? And there were reasons for that. But what happens is once you become impure, so then you go through a process of becoming pure. And that is very much a spiritual process that you have to think about. And it's an opportunity rather than a problem. Gary Seckler, the purpose of circumcision is to protect the wife from infections that can be brought to her from bacteria picked up by the foreskin. I mean, that may be a medical justification, and that may be, why circumcision became so common, for example, in American culture. But just like, Jews are prohibited to eat pork, it's not because in the ancient world, pork was more dangerous and more likely to have infection, and so it was healthier not to eat pork. That is not why. These kinds of laws are called chukim. They're the supra-rational laws. We don't understand why they were given. God said, don't eat pork, so we don't eat pork. God said, circumcise the males, so we circumcise the males. It's not that there's a logical justification for it. There may be benefits, wonderful. But that's not the reason that we do those things. We do it because we were told to do it. And in fact, the Talmud teaches elsewhere that if a non-Jew offers a Jew to eat a ham sandwich, you're not supposed to say, just to get out of the situation and not make a big deal, you might say, I don't like ham. That's wrong. We don't say that. What we say is, oh man, I bet that's really good. And I would love to eat it. But what can I do? My Father in heaven said I'm not allowed to eat it, so I can't eat it. That's actually how we're supposed to take it. And finally, Jacob Ryan Rigsby says, David was the 8th son, and God's wisdom is outstanding. Absolutely. I love it. I'd forgotten that. Yeah, David was the 8th son. 8, we also have 8 with respect to Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is also, especially 8th day Hanukkah, Zois Hanukkah, this is Hanukkah, Zion Hanukkah. It's like, when we get to that 8th day Hanukkah, we're beyond. That's a teaching that you'll always get in a Hasidic shul. So maybe there's something to it. But as we saw, the sages dug hard and tried to come out with a logical inferral using exegetical principles to see why is it that we override Shabbos to perform a circumcision on its 8th day. Ultimately, there's not a firm proof from the text, but all agree that's why we do it. It surely came down as a tradition all the way back from Sinai. Something going on? Oh, thank you. I've got it right here. Before I forget, if you are Jewish and you don't have a mezuzah on your home, you may have seen on our page, we were approached by a wonderful organization, myzuzah.org. You could see, right there, myzuzah.org. And they will send you not only this card with these beautiful blessings, but this mezuzah. They'll send it to you for free. This is an $80 value. As you can see, the mezuzah is not the case on the outside. A lot of people have that mistaken belief. The mezuzah is the scroll inside. This is a very beautiful case that allows you to see it. That is a handwritten scroll. If it was printed, it's not a kosher scroll. It has to be handwritten by a sofer. It has to be packaged in a protective case that will protect it from the elements. And if you're Jewish and your home doesn't have one, go to myzuzah.org. Myzuzah. Is there a myzuzah, right? So myzuzah.org. Nina will write it in the comments. And you can use code accidental, and they will send you a free $80 mezuzah. And, don't take advantage. The idea of this mezuzah is to give it to people that don't have a mezuzah. But you should know that if you have a mezuzah on your house and you put it up 10 or 20 years ago and you've never checked it, it needs to be checked, because mezuzahs need to be checked actually twice every 7 years, so every 3.5 years. And over time, especially the outdoor mezuzah on the front of the house, the elements can get into it, the paper can become damaged, and then it's puzzle. It's no longer providing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week protection that the mezuzah provides for a Jewish home. If you're not Jewish, don't ask for it, because it doesn't do anything for a non-Jewish home. A Jew is obligated to have a mezuzah on his house. A non-Jew is not. So if you're not obligated, it is only an adornment, and a misleading adornment, right? The mezuzah says a Jew lives here. If you're not Jewish, it won't help protect you. It'll be misleading, and it won't help anything. It would just be an adornment. And there's a limited number of these things, so it should be, for Jews to have on their homes. That's what the organization, myzuzah.org, that's their mission. So if you're Jewish, you don't have a mezuzah on your house, go to that website. Nina will put it in the comments. myzuzah.org, use code accidental. We shared that on our page on Facebook.com/accidental Talmudist, where you're watching, unless you're on YouTube. And I believe something like 250 people have already ordered them. And we're so beyond, we're thrilled that this many Jews who didn't have mezuzahs on their homes will now have mezuzahs on their homes. That is wonderful. Sending you all big, big, big love from LA. And with God's help, we'll be together early tomorrow. That's the Friday schedule. Shabbos is coming. So I'll be teaching, God willing, at noon Pacific tomorrow, Friday. All the best, my holy sisters.